They say there was this skinny kid, hair always a mess like he'd just rolled out of bed, who suddenly vanished from the group of boys playing soccer in the yard. When they finally found him, he was frozen in place at the corner of a sports fair, standing in front of a tent thick with the smell of liniment and the sharp thud of gloves smashing into heavy bags. A fighter had just landed a spinning back fist. The opponent crashed to the mat, the roar of the crowd drowning out the pounding rain outside. From that moment on, his eyes never left the cage. His uncle, the one who once shoved an old scratched-up UFC DVD into his hands with names like Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell, still tells the story at his usual coffee shop. I knew right away. That look. It was the look of someone who'd just found the thing that was going to consume his whole life. He grew up poor. His parents never thought fighting could be a career, but ever since that first knockout, he'd tie a ripped towel around his head and kick his bedroom door until it was more bruised than his own shins. That UFC DVD was played and replayed until the disc was worn thin. And that night, when his uncle asked, "You really gonna fight for real?" he didn't answer. He just smiled. The kind of smile no one would ever know was from a kid dreaming, or from someone who'd just signed a life sentence with the cage. They remember him not from the fights, but from the way he treated the gym like a second home, or maybe a second prison. The mats were torn open, foam spilling out like old wounds. The heavy bags sagged like they'd been through a dozen wars. Hand wraps frayed into strings, and the ceiling fan groaned every time it bothered to spin. But the story everyone tells starts at the end. The day he collapsed during sparring in the middle of July, the mat scorching hot under his feet. A left hook dropped him hard, the kind that makes a room go quiet. And yet, before anyone could count him out, he was already on one knee, blood on his lip, motioning for his partner to keep going. Months earlier, in the dead of winter, they'd seen him training barehanded, breath turning into clouds, fingers so stiff it took 2 tries to strap on his gloves. One summer, the heat was so brutal the walls seemed to sweat with them. He never complained, never left early. Then came that one strange afternoon. The coach, a man famous for barking insults instead of encouragement, looked over and simply said, "Not bad today." It should have been the perfect ending, the movie moment. But when the others clapped him on the back, he just looked down at his bruised hands. Almost as if he knew that a single good job could be the last he'd ever hear from that man. They say the roof almost shook that night, not from the size of the crowd. There couldn't have been more than 50 people crammed into that low-ceiling hall, but from the way the noise ricocheted off the peeling walls. Under the harsh glare of yellow lights, the kid everyone thought was just another undercard filler stepped in and, within seconds, began tearing through his opponent with a crisp jab. A body shot that made the other man's breath hitch, and a low kick that smacked like wood splitting. Then came the overhand right, the kind you hear before you see. And the crowd erupted as the other fighter crumpled like his strings had been cut. His coach, a man who rarely smiled, leapt into the ring, roaring, "Beautiful!" while teammates slapped his back hard enough to leave new bruises. Even his mother, sitting in the front row, was wiping at her eyes like she couldn't believe the boy she raised had just done that. For a moment, he was the story, the highlight reel, the whispered name. But here's the thing. That's how the story always starts when you see it from the outside. What you don't hear is the sound of his phone not ringing the next week, or the week after. You don't watch the sunlight fade on the same poster still taped to his bedroom wall, edges curling, while he wonders if that fight was the beginning, or already the end. They didn't notice the injury when it happened. Not until he limped out of the gym hours later, sweat mixing with the dust on his torn shorts. It was just another Tuesday spar, until a misstep on the mat twisted his knee the wrong way, a sharp snap echoing like a dry branch breaking. The guy who was holding pads for him that day still talks about it. He didn't even sit down, just tightened the wrap around his leg and kept going, like if he stopped, the whole world would stop with him. In another world, there might have been an MRI, surgery, rehab. In this one, there was a corner store ice pack, an elastic bandage reused so many times it smelled like sweat baked in under the summer sun. And hope. The kind you cling to when you can't afford doctors. At night, lying on his back, you could hear the click in his knee every time he shifted, the sound sharp in the silence. His gloves were splitting at the seams, hand wraps stained with rust-colored blood, training shoes held together with glue that left his fingers sticky for hours. From the outside, he still looked like a fighter. From the inside, he'd begun to wonder if one morning he'd wake up and his legs simply wouldn't bend. But he'd never say it out loud. Not here. In this game, saying you're hurt doesn't just get you replaced. It erases you. And maybe that's why, on the days when the pain was worst, he smiled the hardest. Everyone at the gym still remembers the night he beat that guy. 3 rounds of pure control, pinning him against the cage, dragging him to the mat, and pounding away until the referee had to pull him off. No one imagined that same opponent would one day be on a UFC poster while he sat in a damp apartment, phone in hand, watching it happen. But it wasn't skill that got the man there, it was noise. From the outside, you'd think he was a star already, live streaming workouts on TikTok and designer shorts, trash-talking anyone with a pulse, posting snappy highlight reels with bass-heavy soundtracks. Millions of views, thousands of comments, his name in the algorithm's good graces. And then the call from the UFC. Not because he was the best, because he was the loudest. The fighter who once beat him tried to play along. He opened an Instagram account, uploaded training clips, even forced himself to say something controversial during a small-time interview. But the words felt wrong in his mouth. His expression refused to sell drama, and the views trickled in like water from a leaky tap. Months later, the other man walked into the cage under bright lights while he was teaching a cardio kickboxing class to women who didn't know they were learning from a man who'd fought on national TV. If you saw him then, you might think he'd moved on. But if you watch closely, you'd notice the way he glanced at his silent phone between rounds, like maybe he still thought it might ring. The cashier remembered him because he always came in late, after the rush, wandering the aisles like someone counting the steps between each shelf. That night, he picked up a discounted tub of protein powder, stared at it for a few seconds, then set it back down as if it were made of glass. In another part of the city, his girlfriend was telling a friend over coffee, "I don't even ask about money anymore. I can tell by the way he avoids my eyes." Back at the gym, he'd sleep on a rolled-up yoga mat in the corner, the smell of old sweat and muscle rub becoming as familiar as his own pillow used to be. Dinner was always the same. Boiled chicken, plain rice, a handful of greens, not because he liked it, but because it was the only equation that fit the budget. The story everyone in the gym still talks about, though, starts at the end. He was shadowboxing when his phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Fight canceled. No explanation, no reschedule, just gone. The check he'd been counting on to cover rent, groceries, and overdue gym fees evaporated in an instant. He stared at the screen for a long time before slipping the phone back into his pocket and throwing another punch. To anyone watching, it looked like he was still training for the next bout. Only he knew there might not be one. They didn't see it happen all at once. It was a slow fade, the kind you only notice when you compare the man in front of you to the ghost of who he used to be. The coach says the first time he knew was during pad work. The jabs that once cracked like gunshots now landed with a soft pop, just enough time for him to blink before the next one came. The right hook that used to stagger sparring partners was now just another sound in the gym. The poster incident came later. Weigh-ins were 2 days away when someone noticed his name missing, replaced by a kid with a fresher record and shinier social media numbers. No explanation, just a quiet pat on the shoulder from the coach, the kind that says, "We both know why." There was the fight too, not the worst beating he'd ever taken, but the one that told the truth. His reactions were half a beat behind. His legs didn't fire when his brain screamed for them to move. He lasted to the final bell, but something else didn't. In sparring, he started masking the limp, switching stances mid-round to hide it. When the coach asked, "You good?" the answer was always the same nod, the same forced smile. And maybe that's why no one noticed. Late one night, when he stayed in the cage after everyone else had left, he stood there, gloves still on, looking at the empty space as if it might answer the question he'd been avoiding. If he ever stepped out for good, would there be anything left of him on the other side? The janitor was the last to see him that night. The gym was nearly dark, a single strip of light spilling through the high window, catching the dust in the air. His gloves hung on the wall hook, the leather cracked, the padding misshapen, the faint stains of old blood like faded ink on a forgotten letter. In the corner, a pair of training shoes lay on their side, soles peeling, laces stiff with sweat. From the doorway, it looked like he was just sitting, shoulders low, hands resting on his knees, staring at nothing. But if you stepped closer, you could hear his breathing, slow, steady, almost like someone memorizing the feeling of being in this place one last time. The janitor would later tell someone, he didn't look sad. If anything, he looked at peace, like a man who'd given everything away and somehow decided it was worth it. Somewhere in the quiet, maybe to himself, maybe to the room, he said it. If I had to choose again, I'd still walk into the cage. And the lock clicked, the lights went out, and the door shut with a hollow thud. By morning, the gym would open again, the hook on the wall still holding his gloves, waiting, though no one could say if it was for the next fight or for the next dream to die here.